G'day expats and welcome to another episode of Expat Chat, episode 98 today. God, we're close. We're getting to the big 100 soon. I
Cracking the
think we'll have
ton.
an online, that's it, man. I think we'll have to have an online party when we reach the big 100. As
Do you reckon
always,
Albo would give a public holiday, maybe?
maybe. I mean, back
He
in
likes to give
Australia,
away public holidays.
we're pretty lucky to have the long weekend, the grand final weekend, AFL, NRL going off. Can't wait. Um, Digressing, for
As
our
always.
listeners and our viewers on YouTube. As always, I'm joined with my mate, colleague, business partner, Brett Evans, who is the Managing Director for Atlas Wealth Group of the Europe, Middle East and Africa's region. G'day, Brett. How are you?
Well, thanks, mate. Well, thanks. And to the good folks on the call today, we're joined on my left or your right, however you're looking at it, with mate and colleague and the Managing Director for the APAC region, James Ridley, who runs the Australian office. G'day, James.
G'day. And this weekend in Australia, big weekend. It's the grand final weekend. Rare event, two Queensland teams in the AFL and the
Loving it.
NRL grand final. Brisbane Broncos, Brisbane Lions. God, Brisbane's going to be set to go off that Caxton Street. Oof, it's going to be
Going
big.
off like a frog.
That's it, mate. That's it. So go the Broncos anyway. But not an AFL fan, just can't get around it. Anyways, today's topic, I want to talk about a really good question for Australian expats actually asked. And it's, when is the right time to start planning for retirement? And I guess a bit of a myth that comes from that is that, if we're retiring, is now the time to start planning for it, which is a big no-no. So I want to address that question. When is the right time to be, planning for retirement, and what does that encompass and look like? So a really good topic for today's episode. Before we jump into it, Brett, I'll get you to do the little disclaimer.
Mate, all the information that we're going to espouse today should be treated as informational and educational purposes only. Please do not construe this as personal advice. If you are looking at getting personal advice, reach out to a specialist like Atlas. Don't talk to these fly-in, fly-out advisors who think they're an expat specialist who really just looking for a tax deduction on a trip overseas.
That's it, mate. That's it. Plenty getting around.
Oh yeah.
Now,
shout out to another firm who will be publishing a content piece in about 2 days' time on this exact topic, as they do. They've got the similar sort of colours to ours. Their name starts with the same letter of ours. Just shout out to them. They know who they're talking about. They're probably our biggest fan. They're ripping off our content.
That's it. Thanks for flipping our content. And today, retirement planning. When is the right time to start planning for retirement? And I think, as expats, Australians, I often come across, and I think, Brett, you're the same as well, when we're talking with older expats where they're sort of late 50s, 60s, they haven't really given too much thought about retirement because often they're just too busy. They're in their groove, they're working away, they're grinding away, they've got the family over there. They've done really well in their career, but they just haven't had the time to set aside, dedicate the planning, and it's usually a case where they've accumulated all these mixed assets. They might have some old properties back in Australia or properties. They might have a super fund or maybe a few super funds. They might have some savings, some random shares, maybe some shares from their employer on an overseas exchange. If they're in your neck of the woods, they have the dues and then maybe an end of service gratuity or benefit that's growing and it's going to be paid out at the end. So often it's a case where all the assets are somewhat scattered across these different sort of buckets, I guess you could say, and there's no real structure. And then it's a case when they do decide to retire, that's when I guess we're sort of swooping in and I guess acting as a bit of a mop-up and clean-up team. And I guess with that in mind, it's, asking yourself the question, when is the right time to start planning for retirement?
And look, it's subjective, but I think there's a high friction level, especially for expats, in terms of when they should do something, how they should do it, because there's so many unknowns. So it's easy just to kick it down the road. They say, oh, but I'm not sure whether I'm going to return to Australia or not. At the end of the day, even if you're not, super is a very effective tool because
Isn't it?
It's when you sort of delve deeper. They always plan to return to Australia, but not in the early phase of retirement, but the later phase of retirement.
No.
And I actually had a call yesterday with a couple, lovely couple, and as I said to them, super wasn't wasn't even a consideration for them. And I said, well, look, let's look at it this way. You don't know where you're going to retire, age 60 to 70, but from 70 onwards, where would that be? And they said, it's going to be more than likely Australia, good healthcare, good climate, good on the bones when you're sort of getting old and creaky. And I said, well, look, you think about it, super, or retirement, I should say, is a 30 to 40-year venture. It's like another career. And if I could say to you, you are going to have a tax-free retirement or tax-free income. Your retirement is your job, and I'm going to give you a tax-free income for 30 to 40 years. Does that sound good? She's like, yeah, of course it does. So that's why we moved to the Middle East in the first place. I said, well, that's what super is. But you'd rather keep assets in your own name, which you got to pay capital gains tax and income tax on, both when you return to Australia and also while you're still an expat. So I said, where's the catch? So, I think people need to sort of get their head around that. I mean, super, it's like the mafia, once in, never out. But once you get preservation age, you can do what you want with it. I had a client who drew down $500,000 and bought a boat. And now he's right now sailing around the world. Good on him. So not a good investment, not encouraging it, but great lifestyle. I've seen the photos. So to me, that's where people sort of delay that retirement. And like we were talking about before we jumped on the call, it's not until lastminute.com then people go, oh shit, I'm retiring. Where's all my assets and where should I put them? But then the problem they face with that is contribution caps and all these things. Everything done with a methodical process can be achieved with the best result. But if you do it a year out from retiring, it's like herding cats, and you got to get a suboptimal result.
That's it. It's funny you talk about a boat and that Australian buying a boat. I think a boat usually stands for something, and those that obviously have dabbled in owning a boat or a yacht or anything like that, boat usually stands for bring over another 1,000, because boats become money pits as you try and maintain them. So, but I guess, when we look at logical things, key ages when it comes to super and retirement things back in Australia, 60 is the preservation age. And if we are retired at age 60, we can actually start to draw down on super. So if you're looking at your timeline and, trying to work backwards, and, you might not want to retire at 60. You might want to retire at 62, 65. You might not want to retire. You might want to keep working until it's just not feasible anymore, from a health aspect. It just depends. But 60, it's a good starting base, or 62 essentially. And, working backwards from that, go, well, how much and how long do I have to get as much as I can into super? You've got your annual caps with super. So you need to give yourself a good runway to get everything into super, as an example. I guess the other ones is looking at your worldwide assets. How are things going to be taxed by the ATO when you start withdrawing on overseas assets? And what I'm talking about is, say, foreign pensions, maybe direct shares that you've accumulated overseas. What's the capital gains tax ramifications of that as well? Have you looked at the appropriate planning or even structure in the future? Talking about a discretionary trust maybe back in Australia when you resume being an Australian tax resident. So all these sort of different aspects is what you, to a degree, should be thinking. Or if you're unsure, that's when obviously you're engaging a firm like us. A really important one that I think a lot of Australians actually also forget is, are you entitled to actually any, I guess, social security in that country in which you've been living in forever? And probably the easiest example might be, say, the United States. If you've lived there on an exactly right. If you've lived there on an E3 visa, L1, green card, US citizen, whatever it might be, and you've put in the minimum 10 years or 40 credits, you are absolutely entitled to Social Security. I love Social Security for my US-based clients or US citizen clients. And the reason for that is it's not, I suppose, deems. It's not tested. It's not means tested at all, which means the, I suppose, Social Security Department in the US, they don't look at your assets and they don't say, hey, you're only entitled to this. It's based on your contributions through the tax system. So that provides a terrific income supplement. And the longer that you leave it to access and draw down on it, the greater that indexation factor that applies to it each year. And I guess one great thing for my retired clients back in Australia right now is the strength of the US dollar against the AUD. I think before the call, I was looking at 63.8 cents, which
Yeah.
is remarkable, to be honest. So probably see 62 in the next couple of months, to be honest. But with that in mind, Social Security in Australia, it's actually tax-free. That's
Yep.
the one great thing about our tax treaty between Australia and the US. Sometimes there's always an argument about what's called the windfall elimination program, but that doesn't really come into it because in order for the WEP, I suppose, provision to apply, it would mean the IRS and the US would need to acknowledge super as some sort of, I guess,
Right, pension.
social security. Yeah, that's it,
Yeah.
which they don't. So it's a bit of a silly caveat. But in practice, I've actually never seen it impact any of my clients that are receiving social security, which is a really good thing. But going back to, I suppose, spending a long time in your different countries, are you actually entitled to any local social security? You know, if you're in Hong Kong, looking at the Provident Fund and that system, Singapore as well, if you're a Singapore permanent resident now, what are you getting out of the main system? The UK, I wouldn't say the UK probably system's great, but you know, if you've been there long enough, are you entitled to some sort of state pension, as an example, much like our old age pension? So it's looking at the long-term planning. I think a really important one is I had a client last year that was thinking about finishing up work early and coming home, but they were actually in their ninth year of being in the US. So we had the conversation. We spoke
Hard
also to a
tax.
US. That's it. We had the conversation about the exit tax. We had the conversation with the US financial planner as well. And we also looked at what they're going to be giving up if they just, you know, came to, I suppose, an end. And what I'm getting at is they still had one more year to get their full entitlement and benefits from the US Social Security. So that's a really important one as well. You know, making sure you've contributed the minimum requirements. But in terms of when is the best time to start planning for retirement, it's 100% subjective. But if you're looking for a starting point, look at the age in which you can start accessing super, 60. So work backwards from there. All right. If I'm starting at 55, I've got 5 years to try and consolidate my assets within super that I'm going to use to create a pension. If that's not enough time, we'll start to work backwards a little bit further. Okay, should I be starting at 52, 51? What are my assets? Property, shares, savings, pension. Are you going to encompass the old age pension in Australia based on your assets as well? What does that look like? So these are all the different planning items that you need to consider for retirement and just trying to work out the best pace to start. That's a really hard one, but if we work through our decision matrix here at Atlas Wealth, we can usually find the best point to start.
To me, it's early the better, you know, because it requires the least amount of work. I mean, I look back with, in actual fact, I look back with jealousy about a mate of mine, or very similar ages, coming out of university into the workforce, and he's a smart cookie, maths guy, ended up working for Goldman Sachs and off to a hedge fund, you know, through a future year. And what he did was he calculated how much he wanted in retirement. And this is back in the good old days when we weren't really restricted in terms of how much he put into super. And he maxed out his contributions at age 20, 21, 22. Okay, he was on a good wicket, you know, coming out as a graduate program but no kids, had a fiance, and he virtually forward provisioned his retirement within 5 years. He had it all front loaded into super and then done. So by the age 25, he knew he was going to have, I think at the time he worked out about 4.5 million because he had 30 odd years, 35 years.
Well, that's the benefit of long-term compounding as well. He put in probably the capital he needed. He obviously did his sort of minimum required rate of return. Said, cool, if I'm getting 5.5%, 6.5% for the next 30 years and I've got this amount of capital in it, I'm laughing. And that's obviously what he did.
Yeah, no, spot on. And to me, when people come to at 55 and they say, I want $2 million at 60, and I tell them they need to save $16,000 a month to get there, they go, but we don't earn that much. And we're like, well, you can do two things. You can either adjust your time frame or adjust your dollar amount in terms of how much your expectations are. What we always say to clients is money doesn't make you happy, but money gives you choice. And having those choices is what makes you happy. Having the ability to choose when to retire is a very powerful tool. Knowing that you could retire today. You've got enough in the bank. You don't have to worry anymore, but you keep working because you enjoy it. You're in control. that's a very, very powerful tool. So, I think you're spot on when it comes to reverse engineering things. Find out what the expectation is. You don't need to know the street you get to retire on. You don't need to look at a dollar amount. And people often say, how much is enough? And I say, well, sometimes people don't know what the gross amount is, but work out an income stream based on a weekly drawdown. So could you, if you owned your house in Australia or wherever you lived, could you live on 1,000 Australian dollars a week? The answer is yes. Then you need $52,000 a year. Reverse those numbers back to a capital value. There's your answer. If $1,000 a week isn't enough, $2,000 a week. Where we see, I see a lot of people come to me who, and these are people probably who should have been financial planners, but they're not. They really get their nerd hat on, which I love. We can get into some really technical conversations, and they present this information to me. And they say, I've got this. They've got 10 things on the go. They show a beautiful Excel spreadsheet. And I said, there's one big problem with all this strategy. They're looking at the gross amount, not the net tax amount. And I said, your strategy here, and it sort of goes back to not so much our parents, but more so our parents' parents. Their saving mentality, you buy property, and then in retirement, you sell these things off in terms of to fund that retirement. But they didn't have super back then. So they'll resign to paying tax. People give me a spreadsheet and they say, I'm going to have $1 million in shares, I have $1 million, $10 million in property, all this sort of stuff. But then I say, well, is the yield on those properties enough to provide you an income? Oh, no, but I'll just draw down and then I'll sell one. I said, well, okay, well, you need to take at least a third off the value of that property. Tax. Capital gains tax. Whereas in super, you don't have to worry about that stuff. So,
that's right.
They go back to the drawing board and they come back to me like, yeah, you're actually right. Super is the best option because it's agnostic to residency as long as it's not an SMSF. And to me, it just, I'm not a pro-super person. I just think it's a very powerful tool, but you need to look at the net tax numbers. If you're relying on these asset sales to fund your retirement, you need to go scorched earth when it comes to what that tax position is. The gross amount looks fantastic. You got to look at the net.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. After the actual sell down events, accessing that liquidity, paying the tax man, two certainties in life, death and taxes. So, and if you've held that asset for a long time, the capital growth is going to be quite significant. And that's right. And I mean, what you're saying there about 1/3, that resonates with essentially probably that person holding those assets as a non-resident. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, non-residents don't get access to the 50% CGT discount concession. They remove the main residence exemption. You can still access the downsizer to a degree, but that's not giving you any tax benefits. That's letting you squeeze in a little bit more room into super. You need to make sure you've got an appropriate strategy in place if you are going to follow that kind of strategy and then hit the exit button, sell down assets. It's normally a case where you'll do it over a longer period just to reduce your sort of tax leakage.
Definitely. And I think that's the thing. It's people need to, they do 70% well. It's amazing what people present to us. And 20 years ago, not so much the case. Now it's just like, wow, there's actually quite a lot of detailed work there. But you need to join the dots. You need to look at it in further detail. You need to go to that next tier down when it comes to how a super fund is taxed in the UK, like we covered off in last week's episode, versus how an investment account is taxed in the UK versus, you need to go through and really get into the net numbers. Gross numbers make you feel good, warm and fuzzies. And then that's better than nothing. Don't get me wrong. If you're doing that, then you're already ahead of the game. But you need to go that next tier down. So you really need to, take it to the next level. So, mate, I think we've covered off there. Did we answer the question? No. In terms of when do you start paying? But we did because time starts now. Whether you're 20, 40 or 50, start now. You need to start applying those numbers because you have time. You have the power of compounding. That's the magic. That's the secret sauce in terms of giving you the numbers that you need. Just start now because we see that analysis paralysis. Oh, I'm not sure where I'm going to retire. Who cares? If you've got the money, you can choose where you're going to retire. And if you're going to pay a bit more tax than you want to, it doesn't matter. At least you've got the money. There's no point not having the cash, but then knowing where you want to go. I know where I'm going now, but too late. You haven't got any money, so you can't go there anymore.
That's right.
So, but mate, just want to do a quick bit of housekeeping, guys. Keep the reviews up.
Yep.
We're loving them. The feedback's fantastic. We want to do this for you guys, so we're loving doing it. And also, we've got 2 seminars next week for those folks in the sandpit. Dubai next Wednesday, the 3rd of October, I believe it is, and Abu Dhabi next Thursday night, the 4th of October. So I'll put a link below where you can register, covering off some monster topics. Tax residency. Everyone knows we've done our submission. We're going to go through that in a lot of detail, really give a lot of value there. Second one that no one is talking about, which is surprising, but we are, with clients. The UAE announced changes to the end of service benefit, and they're going down the pathway of like a provident scheme. You know, your end of service benefit is invested in a trust, and you select, the style, whether it's balanced, Sharia, and so on. That is going to be a complicating factor. So all expats must really be on top of that, because that will affect you on the repatriation and the timing of the repatriation. So this is the first time that people.
That's a good one. Withdrawal timing. That's going to be interesting.
Big time. Big time. So those who turn up will get the benefit. Those who don't won't get the benefit. So make sure you attend. If you can only attend Abu Dhabi, if you live in Dubai, jump on the freeway, yalla. 140 k's an hour, you'd be there. But it's certainly something that, this is going to be a lot of value. Obviously running through property, share markets, currency markets, and last of all, going to be doing some live strategies on what you can do to maximize your time in the UAE. So links down below. Get into it, guys. And James, we'll see you on episode 99. Mate,
sounds good, mate. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.